But I remember your interventions on, or at least comments on the Vietnam War as well as the Iraq War, and I guess I got a two-part question. One is, why in heaven's name did you vote for the? I know you've said you're sorry, but why did you do it? That giving Bush the authority, and did you really think that he would use it wisely? And if so, what does that say about your judgment? But also, now you want to get right out. And I'm wondering, hasn't he got us into a position where getting right out could be really catastrophic for this country?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, if you go back and look at statements I made at the time of the vote and so forth, urged, even after the vote, caution that they're going to give the inspectors more time into March anyway to verify whether or not, in fact, these weapons of mass destruction existed or not. And like everybody else, like most people anyway, accepted the notion that this was a reality. In fact, even those who opposed it, Carl Levin, for instance, accepted the presence of weapons of mass destruction to a conclusion about whether or not that the possible use of force would be legitimate in that case. And obviously it's all proven to be wrong, and we now know the books were being cooked, and people were threatening to fire people, the defense analysts and others who were not willing to provide factual information that would support the ideological framework. So I've said I regret the vote, wish we could have it back. Legitimate question, I think, to be asked of all of us who did so. But that was the rationale, the reason. I mean, you can want a longer explanation, but basically came down to that.
There were those, however, who questioned the validity at the time. Scott Ritter was pretty outspoken.
Mm-hmm. No, there were others in the House, many members. Most people don't focus on the House, with the House Democrats. I thought did a much better job probably looking at all of this.
I remember, this may sound a little weird, but I remember a long interview with the president of France in Time magazine where he really called it. I mean, he said, this is going to bring chaos to the Middle East. This is bad news. And nobody paid any, and what we decided to do was rename French fries rather than listen to what these people were saying.
Well, anyway, that's the explanation. That's why. And the issue as to what we do from here, I think, is a very, frankly, more important question.
Yes.
It's an important issue. Every candidate ought to be asked why, or what reactions they have to the vote they cast. But even those who claim purity on the issue, I would point out to you, have made statements subsequently that indicated they wouldn't know how they might have voted had they had additional information afterwards. So
let me just put one little thing in there. Was there no political consideration on your behalf in voting for this? Thinking, if I want to have a political future, I shouldn't be on the wrong side of this.
No, I've been around too many years to start making those decisions. I mean, a record on the wars in El Salvador and Nicaragua going back, and others. So I've not been hesitant in the past when a stronger, more popular president than this one was making a case. You may recall as a 2-year member of the Senate, giving the response to Ronald Reagan having addressed a joint session of Congress on the importance of being involved in Nicaragua. Down there, I could still hear the thunderous applause as I'm getting prepared to respond to the President of the United States. And they, in a room where they had a mustache as well, it was kind of interesting. It was the first time I'd ever used a teleprompter to give my 10 minutes rebuttal, and it was very crude equipment. And thank the Lord I'd actually written this thing, because about 2/3 of the way in, one of the pages flamed out, literally flamed out. On the thing, because the old system ran by a light bulb that got on fire. And if you watch it very carefully, and if you'd like somebody to see the video, you watch the pupils of my eyes get about that big. I'm looking into the camera going, I got enough presence of mind to know what was on the page so I get through the rest of it. And the second question is obviously, in a sense, I think far more important. And the answer I would give to you is one, obviously, I think this is after 4.5 years, and the conclusion people had even from the beginning of the conflict, there was no military solution here, has been, I think, become even more poignantly clear in the last number of months. And therefore, I have drawn the conclusion that despite the efforts of an American president, vice president, generals, and others to urge the political leadership of the country, the religious leadership of the country, to find some commonality of purpose here, they've been unable to do so. And that I happen to believe that the continued presence of our military, I think, even delays what I hope would be their conclusion at some point. So aside from the obvious issue that we're not going to solve the Civil War by being there militarily, I think there's also a greater likelihood that the Iraqis may decide to come to some political accommodation if they're fully convinced that we're not going to be there in perpetuity, in a sense, or unclear about where this is all going to go. So I, in the past, have been hesitant about having dates certain on various issues for all the obvious reasons that people have raised. In this case, I think it's absolutely the opposite argument. I think here the only way you may get a change of mind is convincing the Iraqi leadership that this is coming to an end, at least militarily coming to an end. The issue of what happens afterwards is certainly, and again, an important question, but I don't think this debate ought to be exclusively about what you would do with the military in Iraq, but what else needs to be done simultaneously as you're talking about redeployment or withdrawal of forces. And there I've argued strenuously for a long time that the role of diplomacy and statecraft, of course, has been abandoned by this crowd almost entirely, although recently they're showing some indication, willing to talk to Assad, willing to talk to some Iranians and so forth, has been encouraging, long overdue. But clearly engaging the regional powers and so forth to understand what needs to be done. I think some people have this sort of hyper notion of the Iranian military presence. I mean, Iran does have some serious, pose some threats, but people don't have much of a knowledge of Iran. To assume that Iran is going to be a major military power that's going to overtake the region reminds me of sort of what the CIA's exaggeration of the Soviet Union when they compared their economy to that of Great Britain, and we discovered quite the contrary. It was far less than that. And I think that's the case here today. We're exaggerating the Iranian potential here, and given the Sunni populations of neighboring countries and likely, they're going to be a bit more cautious, I think, about some of their activities. Certainly you may have a continuation of chaos in Iraq, and I don't deny that. But the assumption somehow that we ought to maintain our presence there, turning Iraq into basically a petri dish for jihadists here, is ought to be reason enough for us to begin to reconsider an alternative. So chaos could hardly be much worse than it is. I think the obligation to Iraq will extend beyond this. 2 million have left the country, 1 million more displaced, 70, 80,000 have lost their lives. And certainly we bear a responsibility for doing something to help this country get back on its feet again. But I don't think that involves necessarily maintaining a military force in the country. I think that needs to be done.
Just one final point on this. If you are the next president, or in fact almost any of the candidates, the Democratic candidates, we're going to be in an unusual position where the President of the United States is going to have to repudiate what the previous administration did. I mean, you're going to have to stand up before the world in some forum and say, we made a mistake. You know, unless the surge works and, you know, the clouds open and the heavens cheer. I mean, is that, can you see yourself as president doing that? How would the next president maintain any kind of continuity in foreign policy for the world?
That's all you did. That's all you did is made a speech about it. I mean, in words, and words have value and meaning, but I think you might not achieve as much as you'd like. I think the actions of a country here, with the world, I think, anxious for the United States to act more responsibly, is going to mean more than some speech you may give about going back and revisiting the decisions that we took to get us involved. And so, as president, I would be looking to how do we engage in a much more constructively, reaching out again to others, to engage the kind of involvement that is necessary for Iraq to get moving again, to start talking about our responsibilities in places like Darfur, Latin America, and elsewhere, here in Afghanistan, Pakistan, elsewhere, to demonstrate, I think, a recognition that the continuation of that policy was damaging not only to ourselves but everyone else in the process, and that the role and the direction we're going to take is going to demonstrate a renewed interest in engaging in other questions, using the tools and resources beyond our military power here to make a difference. And I think that may be more of a statement than any speech you may give about recognizing whether or not the actions that were taken in 2002 or 2003 were wrong.